120mm gunnery instructor, which is down at Lulworth, so that's 2 heads to the dragon down here, Bovington. However, I have a strong feeling that we're about to be saved from me waffling on about being a gunnery instructor, because I've done that enough at the Army stand already today.
So we won't go on about your earlier career in the ballet and that, no, okay. Let's go on with the vehicles then. Let's start with this. What's this fellow coming on then?
Okay, so what you see in front of you now, it's the multi-tool of the British Army. So this is part of the MAN SV, or Support Vehicle Fleet, and this is the SVR, okay, Support Vehicle Recovery. You can tell it's that because it's big, it's got 8 wheels, and it's got a big crane on the back of it, as well as winching equipment on the rear. What's it used for? This is the vehicle that we use to get anything up to and including a warrior out of trouble. It can do that with the crane it's got on top, which is capable of lifting about 15 tons, and then at the back you'll see a winch and a series of bars which can be used to pull it out of trouble where required. The winch at the front you see there, that is actually just there for self-recovery, so you're not going to be pulling anything out, but if the recovery mechanics who crew this, part of the REME, so recce mechs as we call them, if they're having to pull themselves out of trouble, they've probably done something wrong. What's fairly unique to this platform as well is what we call the Heplex suspension, so it can raise and lower its suspension individually in case it's going over rough ground or needs to level itself out on a recovery job.
So on an SVC, is this part of the same sort of manned fleet of trucks and everything? So you've got commonality of parts and driver training and everything, which of course is a big issue as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So the difference with this versus the other ones is the specialised equipment you've got on there. And this is much heavier, believe it or not, with that crane on, that's probably about 35 tonnes. So whereas the lower man trucks, you're looking at kind of normal HGV kind of weight, the 16 tonners as it were, that's a real beast. But again, it needs to be heavy because when it's there, it's going to be pulling out a warrior that's in trouble. You need to have that extra weight to be able to support it. One of the good things with these, of course, recovery mechanics, when they're on camp, they're not the busiest of people. Their job is there to recover people. They get excited about checking things are in date in terms of lifting tackle. When they're in the field, these are the busiest soldiers you'll meet. Vehicles break down, left, right, and Charlie. It's them that needs to recover it. Finally, I will just link back into the gunnery because it's something that I did see that's very cool to watch. As I said, 15 tonnes roughly on the crane at the back there. However, you get 2 of these together, they can put their legs down. You can actually lift the turret off of a Challenger 2 with that, so you can perform maintenance when in there.
Do you know how many of these we've got in the fleet, roughly?
The answer to that is no, unfortunately.
Okay, right,
I can find out tomorrow for you. I'll do my homework.
That way. So recovery vehicle wheeled down here as well as armour, and obviously you can hear that different, that engine note, very distinctive as we see a little bit of armour come out.
Absolutely, so that's going to cut round the corner shortly. Well, we've got the kind of medium-sized Swiss Army knife there. It's got its utility, it's available to do everything. What we're going to see here is a much more limited tool, but a much bigger tool. Coming around the corner shortly, you are going to see the CRAV, the Challenger Armoured Repair and Recovery Vehicle. This one in full OES regalia, so operational entry standard. It's got the extra armour on there, it's got the dozer, it's got the bar armour. It needs to be this big because it recovers the up-armoured tanks that we see. As the name suggests, this takes charge of repair and recovery. However, the crane that you see on this one is not there for recovery. The crane is there for basically taking packs out of Challengers, so the engine. In theory, it is also able to change its own pack and its own engine out. However, in practice, it's a little tricky. Dozer blade at the front can be used for pushing obstacles out the way, removal, creating paths, even digging shell scrapes for the tanks.
I think the CRAV looks one of those fit for purpose. If you drew this, you couldn't draw a vehicle any better, could you, for recovery sort of roles? And obviously now you're going to have a new tank coming along. I'm assuming you're going to have to start adapting the CRAV to meet the new tank.
Well, I can assure you, as something that we have already been trialling with Challenger 3 is the recovery of Challenger 3 with a CRAV. And as is, the CRAV is more than capable of doing the job. I'm not a recovery mechanic, but the rough rule of thumb, the vehicle has to be heavy enough to take it. Up armoured, that can weigh about 82 tonnes, which is more than a Challenger 3. So far, we have been successful in that recovery process. It has dawned on me that I've talked about it as a recovery vehicle and haven't actually mentioned any of the recovery assets on there. So at the front, you've got the large winch, which can do around 50 tonnes in standard, and then if you 2-to-1 it, you can pull about 90 tonnes. And then the bars that you see at the back will drop down, form an A-frame, and that's what you use to tow yourself out of trouble. Once again, crewed by the REME, okay? You've got 3 people possible in here, so traditionally you'd have 2 recovery mechanics and a vehicle mechanic so they can fix the tank that's broken down.
And that dozer blade, something we sometimes forget, as soon as urban ops are on, you really need dozer blades on everything, don't you, to clear the way?
Yeah, clearing cars, burnt out rubble, that's really what it's there for. And we've talked about kind of the utility vehicles. Not quite the single track, this absolutely is, okay? When you think of something that is specific for one purpose only, you've got Titan. So Challenger 2 Armoured Vehicle Launch Bridge, that's what we just call it, Titan, okay? This is so specific in what it does, yet so important. This basically allows us to carry out that concept of manoeuvre warfare, where tanks need to cross rivers, bridges that have fallen down, anything like that, that's what we call upon. Crewed by the Royal Engineers. They, incidentally, Royal Engineers, they love being called fella. So at the end of this, if anybody wants to come up and say cheers fella, they'll really appreciate that. So the bridge that you've got on the top there, it can carry a variety of them. We've got the big one today, bridge number 10, which can clear a span of 24.5 metres. I'm going to talk a little more about the bridge process, because we're fortunate enough to see that getting launched shortly, and what goes into it and why it's so important that we protect it.
And gap crossing, I know is that phrase, you know, it sounds obvious, doesn't it? But the idea of an armoured mobile force heading off somewhere, suddenly coming to, we think of a river, it may be other obstacles that way, and suddenly having to stop and then look embarrassed at each other, that's obviously so key. And you've said in another sense as well, it's a very important asset that you protect, because there's never enough of these, are there, engineer variants in the military?
No, there's absolutely not. In looking forward, when we're getting these new vehicle platforms, it's a really exciting time for the engineers, as they'll be looking at possibly new bridging assets. Overall, as we've touched on, this time, I'd say the next 5 to 10 years are going to be truly revolutionary for armoured warfighting, whether that be frontline in terms of the armoured corps, or combat support like the REME and the Royal Engineers. But we'll talk you through this now. So, we've found the possible bridge crossing site. How's that found? Now, engineers will have their own specific engineer recce. Back in the day, they would have been mounted in CVRT variants. Now it's more likely to be a Warrior or one of the Ajax variants. However, our own reconnaissance, some of the vehicles you might see later coming out, would be able to ID this. The engineer recce will go and check for its suitability. But before this has moved across, we've found our possible bridge laying site. In an armoured situation, we're going to have what we call home bank protection set. So that's overwatch. We're going to have a troop of tanks that are going to be able to sit there and overlook the objective. It's an important thing to note here. We're not looking at the objective. We're looking in depth to make sure there's no enemy threat there. As the vehicle's released, pushing forward, depending what's available, we're probably going to send a tank down with it, or we might sandbag it with 4 Warriors. Dismounts will get out, provide some form of anti-tank threat as well. Talking through this, you'll see this isn't a long process, but it's vital that the timings are right, because as this bridge is going down, the reserve armoured forces are going to be basically in a hide waiting to go, and your timings are very, very important, because we cannot leave the Titan exposed there. Once that bridge is down, if we're in a hostile environment, that's going to get escorted back, maybe pick up another bridge, but get out of there, because we can't afford to lose that. We have no other capability that can drop that down.
And of course, the British Army actually had a really good reputation for bridging, because in the Second World War we had Bailey bridges, we had the Inglis Bridge that they were experimenting down at Christchurch in the 1930s, and that idea of no point in having a tank at all if you cannot keep it going. And so these other elements, we've talked earlier about things like having infantry, etc. All these other elements, so important for a whole armoured force. And just watching this deploy the bridge, again, that idea, it might, as we're watching, seem slow, but the different thought of man-made bridging, you know, having to float pontoons over and everything, you guys need to be going quickly, don't you?
Yeah, we do. And I've massively highlighted the vulnerability of this. One of the most common questions I've been asked today in terms of countering armour and what we're doing is, of course, the drone threat. Call it what you will, drones, loitering munitions, surveillance drones. Actually, that can work in our favour now, because we don't have to expose our forces. We can scout forward with that drone force to ensure that there is actually no enemy threat on the other side, and it enables us to react to it. Talking of manual bridging, it does remind me of my favourite bit that I heard, I think back, it could have been around Juneau Beach. There was an Avery that got beached in, it fell into a pond basically, and as opposed to trying to use the vehicle, they just dismounted the vehicle and actually drove over the top of the Avery, used it as a small box girder bridge, which it wasn't. We're not quite at that stage, trying to get that down.
Which is why personally I always think it's a shame if we get rid of kit, because sure enough we can find another role. And of course one of the other roles with British kit, it's been sent out to support the Ukrainian army, and that's been quite an important second use of a lot of things that we've said goodbye to, but actually CVRT, etc., having a life now outside, out in Ukraine, so a second life.
So what we've got coming around the corner now, we talked about the kind of reconnaissance elements of the forces, and this actually is a Tankfest debut for it. We've got the Jackal 3, okay? Jackal 3, how are we going to tell it apart? Well, it's a bit boxier because we've upgraded it from the Jackal 2 and the Jackal 1. Greater armour. The biggest thing that you're going to notice if you're into that kind of thing, it's got windscreens. The other one's never had windscreens, and it's got an actual semi-permanent roof. The roof is attached under there to a roll bar device, ROPS we call it. That was an upgrade on the Jackal 2. Jackal 3's come out and it's now a constant fit. What does it do? So it is basically there for deep reconnaissance, so it's going to operate at length, it's going to find them, and it can provide fire support on small scale missions. Crewed by 3 people, okay, the light cavalry regiments are the ones that use it. Traditional crew, commander, driver, gunner in the ring at the top there. It can take a 4th crew person, that's operationally dependent. Most recently it's been out on Op Nukem in Mali. The 4th crewman was either a translator, a medic, RMP, something like that. But 3-person crew operating like that can operate at range, as the name suggests. It's a long-range reconnaissance vehicle. You're looking at about 500 kilometers off it, and then the troop sergeant's variant of this would be the Coyote. When we get in the full Jackal 3, it will be known as the Jackal 3E. Long wheelbase, 6 wheels, that really pushes their ability out to operate for about a week at a time without refueling, because they're going to have all the jerry cans on there as well. Nifty little features include the ability to manually raise and lower the suspension. So you can raise the suspension, because now it's got that deep V, avoiding IED blasts. You can raise it up to get over rocky terrain, and then when you really want to put some firepower down, because that 50 will shake, or a grenade machine gun, you can lower it right down to provide that stable fire support. And we've got another light reconnaissance vehicle here. So this is the Foxhound. Foxhound was pretty much a direct replacement for the Snatch Land Rovers. We realised that the Snatch Land Rovers weren't up to task on Op Herrick, and this is the variation that we've gone through. We've got a few of these. This is, I believe, technically a light protected patrol vehicle, okay? Yeah, high manoeuvrable vehicles tend to be a little bit more heavily armoured. Foxhound, 7.5 tons, about 80 kilometres on the road, a little bit faster off-road. Everybody's used these, up to and including the Royal Marines, heavily used in Afghanistan. The wheels are all independent drive, okay? So in theory, you're able to lose a wheel and continue on. These can drive on 3 wheels.
And you can, the public, you can see very clearly that shape that was a result of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The V-shaped hull, again, we mentioned it earlier with some tanks. the idea, if it does drive over a mine, the blast of the mine is vented up the sides of the vehicle, sacrificial bins or wheel guards, but the whole vehicle doesn't get flipped over, and that's something that's very common to those MRAC vehicles, etc., isn't it?
And on that, there's only one door on the front hand side, so it maintains that rigidity. Now we've got another Tankfest debut for you. MIV, Mechanised Infantry Vehicle, better known as Boxer to us. So this is going to form the backbone of our mechanised infantry brigades moving forward, and indeed our armoured brigades. Okay, facts and stats, between 32 and 38 tonnes. It's going to be there pretty much 1,000 kilometres on one tank of fuel, and this is what we're going to touch on shortly with the whole wheeled versus tracks. But highly modular. Modular's a big buzzword recently, but it basically means future-proofing, because that single vehicle platform, which is already in service in the Netherlands and in Germany, and has been for some time, they know how to keep it going. They know what to do. Variants are going to include a medical one. This is actually the engineer asset. It's very hard to tell that, but if you were to look into the back, half the seats have gone to make room for deck charges and stuff like that. We've got, in terms of protection, a 50 caliber machine gun with a remote weapon system sitting on the top there. Now, some common misconceptions about this vehicle. This vehicle is allegedly going to be the replacement to Warrior. It's not a replacement to Warrior. Okay, what it is there to do is to create the ability to project force rapidly across continent without having to use basic rail flats. The logistical nightmare that is moving tanks around makes them very easy to target. With these, we can get from one place to the other using roads without putting any excess wear and tear onto the vehicles.
And on this, the whole point, you said that word modular, because I always go back to like the Thunderbirds bit, and that's really the back section. You can swap it ultimately for other variants, other pods to go on the back to perform a slightly different role, or that was the idea originally, isn't it, as a modular type vehicle. Very big. I think for many of you here, if that's the first time you've seen Boxer, we did have one here some time ago from the Dutch Army. They brought one over, but really interesting to see, because that is something that the British Army is just starting to get used to the idea of, isn't it? And we're going to see an awful lot more of them over as they enter into service.
And it's large because it's carrying kit and equipment. It's got much higher survivability rates. Allegedly, some of the new modular armour, you could be looking at up to 30mm cannon that it's defensible about. So in that configuration, comfortably Warrior levels of security.
I know the public here is probably not allowed in here, but having been in one myself, they really do look like state of the art. You know, quite fantastic driving position, everything else, isn't it? So that's a real privilege us to have some of the newer one. Going back in time, still a great vehicle, still in service in the military, but changing its role a bit.
Yeah, Warrior 510, yeah, the standard infantry carrying variation that we've seen a few times today. What we use it for now is changing though. As the CVRT family of vehicles went out, and that's why people like a Warrior, because you can jump on the brakes. Anyway, as the CVRT variation went out, this has increasingly found a niche within reconnaissance. So whether that be the engineer reconnaissance that we talked about, or armoured reconnaissance that the recce troop within an armoured regiment such as mine would take up. Yes, it is a lot bigger, but you can carry a lot more kit. So we've invested heavily in putting the drones in there, anti-tank abilities. I've seen plans, one of our troop sergeants made fully laid up plans to turn that into a specific anti-tank variation with racks and racks of javelins in the back of there. So whilst its initial role might be coming to an end, because tactically we might not be looking for that kind of tank support, it's still got a decent future ahead of us because it is a quality vehicle that's well liked, relatively easy to maintain and reliable.
And talking, and again, you're welcome to talk amongst yourselves as it were, but talking to people who've served on Warrior, they all love it. They think this is a great bit of kit. You can see it's very mobile, the speed there, 30mm rod and cannon still in the turret. So that's a fair old bit of firepower on the top there as well. And as is mentioned, Corporal Wright saying there, it will be in service for a fair few years yet to come. And there we go, right, a bit of a familiar face as well.
Absolutely, familiar face, Looking slightly different this year. We thought we'd give her a new paint job. We'd go old school British Army of the Rhine, green and black. But with the dust, it now just looks a sandy brown. This is the infamous Megatron, okay? Challenger 2, operational entry standard with a bit of theatre entry standard thrown in there. 3rd generation main battle tank, composite armour, fully automated fire control system. This is as much as we can get out of a Challenger 2 at the moment. So-called Megatron because down at Army Trials Unit, she's always transforming, so it seemed appropriate that we'd call her that. An interesting point to note, you may see a relatively unusual camouflage pattern of the commander there. That's because that's currently being commanded by the second in command at ATU. He's our Canadian exchange officer. We've had a Canadian at ATU for years, and Major Mitchell is one of the best I've ever known. He's treating himself to a day out in the tank today.
So that's another one of the things that goes on with armies, training with each other, but also having appointments that are regular. Used to be an American gunnery sergeant down at Lulworth, always second in command of the trials unit, is a Canadian, hence there's actually a Ram tank, Canadian Ram tank outside in honour of the Canadian connection. Very important because, to put it bluntly, we're very unlikely to go to war on our own. We need our allies and getting on well with our allies that way. And Canada's been a great ally of this country for an awful long time. Now, Megatron, you mentioned, just to say again for the public, everything that's added to a tank, someone's got to test it so that you realise it won't interfere with something else. And there's a classic there on the back there, what they call, what's it, the bird table or tea table, things like that. Is that going to, this was put on for ECM equipment out in the Gulf, or rather in Afghanistan, Iraq. And of course you've got to make sure that doesn't interfere with any other operations, and that's kind of your job, isn't it?
And that's a good example. You know, the ECM was there as an IED deterrent for remote detonated ones. People far more intelligent than me reckon that can probably be used as some form of drone defence.
So one of the things I'm always fascinated by, we're getting annoyed with the noise here because we can't hear ourselves think when this goes past. That's still part of a tank story. That threat of that noise over the hill, coming down the blind side of a tree line or something like that. You imagine you're the infantry and you hear that coming. That's all part of the power of a tank that's over and above its weapon systems. They still have enormous symbolic value. You know that, you've crewed them.
And it's one of the things, again, great questions from everybody today. Is the age of the tank over? No, we're just going to change how we're doing it, because even though the core role of a main battle tank nowadays is to engage and destroy enemy armour, that's what we're there to do. You cannot understate the psychological impact, the reassuring psychological impact for friendly troops, and the negative one it's going to have on that. I've said at length today, I think tanks are the shock cavalry of the late Napoleonic era. They're no longer as invulnerable as they might have been in the high Middle Ages, but now they're going to be used surgically to punch through, because there is nothing on any platform, wheeled or otherwise, that can provide what a tank can do.
And again, I would repeat to you, we're bound to say this, aren't we? We're the Tank Museum, but go and just look at all those stories. Everyone who's predicted the end of the tank has come a cropper. It'll change, it'll morph. Maybe we won't have this gentleman that will be in the future. Corporal Wright will be crewing a tank, maybe from a different vehicle. We might have autonomous, we might have everything. But tell me an army that doesn't want mobile firepower with some form of protection. And when you add those things up, they pretty much come to a tank, don't they? We love trying to change the names. We love coming up with new project titles. What comes out the end is something that looks like a tank. So I have a feeling we will be, as one of the speakers was saying, 100 years' time, someone will still be standing in the arena explaining how that thing that we will commonly call a tank is still around and what it's doing. So they're going to come out now and they're going to parade around for us. I mentioned earlier, you know, it is your army. Just make sure those guys feel supported. And it's not just guys, it's young ladies crewing some of the vehicles now as well. We've got household cavalry, we've got lots of women now entering the various different armoured units as well. So again, as I said, all your army, give them a round of applause as they go around, and show them our support. when they speed up, boy, are we going to get dusty. So.